Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology. And I want to welcome you to this week's very special episode called What Planet Are They On? And the person that we'll be looking at this time will be J.K. Rowling, the creator of the Harry Potter books. Now, What Planet Are They On? Is a game that I devised when teaching students of my astrology class. We all know that when you sit down to read an astrological chart, pretty much the first thing that you look at is the sun sign, then the moon sign, and then the ascendant, or the rising sign. In my work, I added a fourth component called the ruling planet. Now, different astrologers have different ideas of what a ruling planet is. Some say that the ruling planet is the planet that rules your rising sign or your ascendant. Others will say that the ruling planet is the final dispositor of the chart. And still others will say the ruling planet is the ruler of the astrological chart. I have a different way of reading the ruling planet. To me, the ruling planet is the planet that rules your sun sign. Every sign that we have in the zodiac is ruled by a particular planet. In fact, some signs are even ruled by two. But the ruling planet is the planet that rules your sun sign. Let's say you were born under Libra. Then your ruling planet would be Venus, named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. So if the ruling planet is the planet that rules your sun sign, what does it do? To me, the ruling planet is like your patron saint, your den mother, your corporate sponsor, and your life coach, all wrapped up into one. So when we are sitting down to read an astrological chart, which, as I said, usually begins with the sun, the moon, the rising sign, and then you launch into any of the planets or asteroids that might catch your eye or catch your interest, what I like to do is go to the ruling planet. To me, the ruling planet is as important as the sun, moon, and rising sign are, because your ruling planet is like your cosmic partner. It's the planet that's looking out after you most. And wherever it is in the sky, it will be doing whatever it can to promote your interests and to protect you from other planetary forces that might be taking place in your astrological chart, either natally or by transit. So really, your ruling planet is like your patron or your patroness. But it does a little bit more than that. Let's take Saturn, for instance, all right? Saturn is the ruling planet of the zodiac signs Capricorn and Aquarius. Now, whenever someone mentions Saturn in an astrological conversation or in a reading, Saturn's kind of like the bummer planet, right? It's the planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. It's the spoiler. No one's really interested in hearing about their Saturn. I mean, there's kind of a macabre interest in it, but other than that, it's always like, where's my Saturn? Or what's going to happen with Saturn? All right, so Saturn is pretty much regarded as being a negative planetary influence. On a good day, maybe it's a teacher, but more often than not, it's seen as the spoiler or as something negative. And so most people have this very sort of like, ooh, Saturn, I don't know if I want to deal with Saturn attitude. But if you're born under the astrological signs of Capricorn or Aquarius, and remember that Saturn is Aquarius's traditional ruler, then Saturn is your patron. Saturn looks out for you. Now, does that mean that you get a pass when it comes to tests, trials, and tribulations? No, you have to face them just like everyone else has. But by being born under Saturn, by Saturn being your ruling planet, it has inured you to its energies. And inure is a really great word because it means, on one hand, you've grown accustomed to its energies. It's natural for you to understand Saturn, okay, because it's your ruling planet. But at the same time, inure is that you've become accustomed to something which can be actually negative or maybe even toxic, or other people might be felled by an energy, or it might be too difficult for them to handle. Because Capricorns and Aquarius, Saturn energy plays such a strong influence in their life they're so accustomed to the setbacks, to the obstacles, to the detours and delays that mark the lives of the children of Saturn, that they work with it. They naturally expect it. And in a way, because Saturn is their ruling planet, Saturn has outfitted them for going through these tests, trials, and tribulations. People born under Capricorn and Aquarius are less likely to throw up their hands and say, "This is impossible, I can't deal with this," and more likely to be like, "Okay, here we go again. Here's another obstacle, here's another delay, here's another detour, here's another period of time in my life where it will be 7 years of plateauing." The children of Saturn understand this, and they understand this naturally. And that's also a wonderful thing about a ruling planet. A ruling planet will bequeath and bestow certain talents and abilities. It will also give you a temperament and outfit you for taking on the pluses or the minuses that life has to throw at you according to its own planetary energy. So when we look at J.K. Rowling's birthday, we see that she was born on July 31st, 1965, which means that she was born under the zodiac sign of Leo and that her ruling planet is the sun. Now, this is all kinds of marvelous because the sun is the only planet that's really a star. And that's what makes Leos so special. They are unique and standalone. Leos don't orbit people. People orbit them. So let's start with the zodiac sign itself, Leo. Leo is named after the lion. And the lion, as we all know, is at the top of the food chain. A lion is the symbol of magnificence, confidence, and authority, and also that fantastic hair. But another word that I want to use with Leo is August. The month August, which happens to be the month of Leo. But August also means respected and venerable, someone that you look up to. And that is a very good word for the zodiac sign of Leo. Now, Leo children, that is, people born under the zodiac sign of Leo children are golden children. I want you to think of that moment at the beginning of Lion King where the cub Simba is being held aloft by Rafiki, the shaman mandrill, who is basically calling all of the animals to come and witness the golden prince, the golden child of their king, who is the lion. That is a perfect example of a Leo child, okay, of someone born under the zodiac sign of Leo. They are golden, they are resplendent, and they are respected. Leo is associated with the good father. There are 3 zodiac signs of the father. The first is Aries, the coach dad, Leo, the good father, and Capricorn, the dark father. Now, this is no comment on any of these signs' fathers at all. What it refers to simply is the time of year, the season of the year. And again, when we remember that astrology originates in the Northern Hemisphere, what we're using for the seasons here are Northern Hemisphere seasons. So Aries is the beginning of the agricultural year. And so the coach dad is the dad that gets you up and going, and make sure that you're ready to be the best that you can be in your life. Leo is associated to the summer, which is a time of abundance when days are long, nights are short, and you can sleep out under the stars if you like. Capricorn is associated to the dark father, which, as I said, doesn't mean that Capricorn fathers are mean or evil or anything along those lines. It's simply a reference to the time of year. Capricorn rules over the winter solstice, which is the time of year when days are shortest, nights are longest, and the sun feels most distant and remote. We're very, very cold at the winter solstice. So here, in the time of abundance, which is associated to Leo, the good father, as I said, Leo is the sign of the good father. And many Leos are indeed born with good fathers. Now, what's a good father? Because that can be a little bit of a loaded statement there. A good father is a father who shows up. Okay, so good father is a providing figure, a protective figure, a bit of a disciplinarian too, But a good father is going to set you up for success out there in the world when you are going to have to be on your own. But as we all know, not all fathers are good, just like not all kings are just and not all leaders know where they're going. But that doesn't stop us from wanting them to be that way. We all want someone to look up to be the bigger person, to take the high road, and to explain why bad things happen to good people. Good fathers are figures that we look up to. Good fathers are role models. Now, if you were born under the zodiac sign of Leo and your father was good, great. Things are going to turn out fantastic. But if not, then you will make a point of being the good father that you should have had when you were a child growing up. Now, Harry Potter, the kid that grows up under a staircase and winds up attending a school for wizards, Harry Potter shares J.K. Rowling's birthday. He's a Leo, just like her. And what's fascinating about the Harry Potter books, and there are 7, is that Harry Potter books are full of father figures. First of all, Harry idolizes his father. His father was a wizard, which is why Harry's been summoned to Hogwarts, a school that teaches wizards in training. But Harry never knew his father, and that's because Harry's father died when Harry was an infant. In fact, Harry's father died protecting Harry and his mother from the evil Voldemort. And his mother also died protecting Harry, sacrificing herself so that Harry could live. So when Voldemort casts the killing curse on Harry, who's just a baby at the time, the spell rebounds and backfires, leaving Voldemort disembodied and Harry with a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. This scar symbolizes the original wound, the loss of his parents. But like I said, Harry is at no loss for father figures, people who are there to protect him, to sponsor him, and to prepare him for going out into the world as an adult wizard. There are father figures in Harry Potter like Dumbledore, who's the head of Hogwarts. There's Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, his father's best friends, and then there's the giant Hagrid. These are all protectors. These are all teachers. These are all people who have been assigned the task to make Harry the best wizard that he could possibly be. Because at the end of the books, it will be Harry who stands alone against Voldemort. Now, I began by describing Leo as the zodiac sign of the good father, but women born under the zodiac sign of Leo are just as paternal. They're just as protective, they're just as disciplinarian, and if you've watched any of those nature shows, then you know it's the lionesses who do all the work. It's the male lion that sort of like lounges out there under the sun and rests and sort of takes in the rays, while the lionesses are raising the cubs, they're patrolling the territory, and they're bringing home the bacon. Or maybe what I should rather say is the zebra or the antelope. So it's the lionesses, which I would like to call the leonesses who do all the work. Leonesses, that is, a woman Leo, are hardly stay-at-home cats. If anything, that role, as I just described, is going to be played by their mate. People assume that leonesses want to be pampered when it's actually the male Leos. In many cases, leonesses are the higher earners, they're more successful, and they're the ones with the name recognition. Yet, interestingly enough, female Leos will downplay their accomplishments so as not to outshine their mate. A leoness will stand behind their mate just like a lioness will stand behind hers. And not only will a female Leo stand behind her mate, she will also stand by him. Female Leos are fiercely loyal. Anyone who messes with a loved one better be ready to mess with a leoness, as attested to when Harry's mother sacrifices herself for Harry. The other thing that I find fascinating about Leo is that they are the most social of all the big cats. Tigers, pumas, leopards, they're famous for being isolated, for being alone. Yes, the mother will raise the cubs, usually on her own, but the father is typically not around. Leos are the most social of all the big cats. Family is very important to a lion pride. In fact, we think of pride as being proud of yourself, but I also think that we should think of pride in terms of Leo, in terms of how important the family is to a Leo. So, family is very important to Leo, just as important as it is to their neighboring zodiac sign, Cancer. Now, one last note that I would like to make before we move on is that Voldemort, the dark magician, the dark sorcerer who's hunting Harry, who tried to destroy him when he was an infant, but then spell backfired, Voldemort is also a strange kind of father figure for Harry. He's a dark one. The reason Voldemort tries to kill Harry as an infant in the first place is because it was prophesied that Harry will kill him. This, as some of you may already recognize, is the theme of Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn is the god of time who overthrows his own father, and it's prophesied that he will be overthrown by his own son. So Saturn goes and swallows every one of his children as they're born and goes hunting for Jupiter, never finds him. Jupiter comes of age and overthrows Saturn. But during that period of time, Saturn was hell bent on destroying Jupiter as a child. He went searching the world for him. And this is also what's happening with Voldemort. He is searching for Harry because it was prophesied that Harry would overthrow him. What's fascinating about this, though, is the astrology. When you go ahead and look at J.K. Rowling's chart, you will see that there is indeed a Saturn-Jupiter square. We have Saturn at 16 degrees Pisces, forming a square to Jupiter at 22 degrees Gemini. In the animal kingdom, if a father lion, the head of a pride, is overthrown by a more virile male, the usurper lion will immediately kill all the cubs of the previous father. This is in order to set up its lineage and protect them from any sort of rivals. Now let's talk about the ruling planet, the sun. Like I said before, the sun is not a planet. The sun is actually a star. And that's what makes Leo's ruling planet so unique and standalone. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, living in an orb of light, all right? You're surrounded by this golden light in an orb. So darkness doesn't touch you. Darkness is outside this golden orb of light. This is what life like a Leo is like. Like the sun, you're the light that people are drawn to, the heat that warms their heart, and the golden promise that everything's going to work out in the end. People rely on you to be there. And as a child of the sun, being born under the zodiac sign of Leo, you take that responsibility seriously. In fact, no zodiac sign places a higher priority, a higher value on individuality than a Leo does. Leos are the most individual of all the zodiac signs. They're the most standout. And their feeling is, I must always be true to me. I must always be true to who I really am, because the sun is associated to the self that makes you special, the self that makes you individual, the self that you must protect from being overwhelmed by darkness, and the self you ultimately will grow into. Like Simba the cub. Simba the cub eventually will grow into becoming the king, just like Harry. Harry will grow into becoming a master wizard. So this is the self. This is the golden light that all Leos are given when they are born into this world. And this is the golden light that they must both live up to and the golden light that they must protect. Now, not all Leos are bold, proud, and self-assured. That's because not all Leos were born in the daytime with the sun overhead. Some were born when the sun was setting, or some were born at night when the sun was nowhere to be found. Now, if you look at J.K. Rowling's birth chart, you'll see that we've pictured the sun as being high in the sky. Well, the truth is, we don't have J.K. Rowling's birth time, so we don't know when J.K. Rowling was born. When I'm working with a birth chart like that, I will automatically cast it for 12 noon, and I will place the sun at the top of the chart. The reason being that, firstly, so I can see all the planets underneath the sun, all right, and see what their relationships are to the sun. The second reason for casting a noontime chart is because I'm kind of like splitting the moon halfway through the day. I can pretty much see where the moon is going to wind up. The moon is the fastest moving planet in astrology, and it will only spend 2 days in one zodiac sign. So by casting the chart for noon for a chart that I don't know the birth time, I'm kind of hedging my bets on where the moon is going to be. Keeping that in mind, I want you to ignore the rising sign because we don't know the time of birth. The time of birth gives us the rising sign. It tells us what zodiac sign was rising on the horizon when the person was born. So we don't know the ascendant at all. And we also don't even really know where J.K. Rowling's sun is. So that's why I wanted to describe to you how the sun changes as it moves through the astrological chart. Let's say that you were born under the zodiac sign of Leo and that you were born at sunrise. That's going to make you feel like you're on 24/7, like you're constantly on. People who are born at sunrise often feel like somehow they've been pushed to the head of the line. They don't know how they got to the head of the line, but they've been pushed to the head of the line. And so they are always being seen by other people in their lives. It's almost kind of a feeling like living in a fishbowl in some regard. Now, some signs are very comfortable with this, like a Leo. Other signs, like let's say you're born under Cancer or Scorpio, you're not going to be that comfortable with this. You want your private business to be your private business. But if you're born under Leo at sunrise, you're very on, you're very smiling, you're sending out those beams of sunlight to other people, and those people are sending those beams of light back to you. But let's say the sun has moved, that you're born in the morning, in the hours before noon. This makes you very aspiring as a person, okay? You know that there's a place that you need to be, and that place that you need to be is 12 noon, okay? It needs to be at the top of the astrological chart. You need to be seated on the solar throne of day, okay? So people born in the morning under the zodiac sign of Leo are very aspiring. They're developing as people. They show a talent, they show an ability. Other people recognize this. They want to promote this and they want to be promoted, but they don't really know what they're doing. And so this is a very aspiring placement. This is the sun rising up into the sky, becoming warmer and more radiant as it does, but it's not quite there yet. So there's kind of a youth to this type of a chart placement for Leos. Let's say you're a Leo and you're born at 12 noon, okay? You are seated quite solidly on the solar throne and you're looking down at everyone beneath you. Okay, so this is very much a status placement. That specialness, that uniqueness comes very natural to you, and you have a sort of authority to it. People may treat you like an authority. They may look to you for approval. They may ask if they can count on your support, and they may even rely on what your opinion is or what you have to say. And as a Leo born at noon, you have a very strong personality and you have no problem expressing it, usually in a leadership or authority way. Now, the problem that you can have here is remember the time of year of Leo. Leo rules the time of year in the north when the sun is out and it's hot and it's lit. So sometimes the summers can get too hot. Sometimes the heat can be too much. All right. And so with the sun at this kind of a position, the personality can be so strong that it's overbearing. Plants that began the summer responding to the sun and growing bigger and leafier and greener, now, once we're into the month of August, their leaves may be burned because it's too hot, it's too much heat. And so people who are Leo born at this noon placement have to sort of temper that with themselves. Ask themselves, am I coming on too strong? Am I sort of dwarfing life? rather than encouraging it, rather than calling it forth? Are plants more burnt, or have they gone into heat coma, because it's just too much heat, it's too much light, and the leaves have started to burn? This is something that Leos born at this time of day want to pay attention to. Let's say you're a Leo and you're born into the afternoon. Okay. Let's say you're born, after 2 p.m. All right. When the sun is peaked and then it's beginning to fade, it's beginning to lose its heat, its light, its vitality. This can be a bit of a difficult situation for you because you feel like you're losing your vitality, you're losing your energy, and you can start to have a growing fear of not being seen, of not being recognized. Now, this can begin very lightly, but as the sun moves more and more to the sunset position, that feeling of anxiety can increase. In fact, I have found that people born with their suns in the eighth, seventh, or sixth houses have the most difficulty with feeling like they are themselves. Remember those images that I've shared with you earlier about Leo and the sun, the golden child living in an orb of light? If you think about that, that's a big expectation to live up to. Now, there are going to be some Leos who just wear that mantle naturally. They're just like, of course I'm important, and then maybe if they remember you, and you're important too. There are Leos who are like that, who have a very strong or bold sun. Not all Leos have a strong or a bold sun. And there can be Leos who don't feel like they fit that description of Leo at all, who actually may feel very haunted by the shadows they cast, that they're not being seen, they're not being recognized, they're not being supported, that they want respect, that they want to be an August or an August Leo, but that they're not getting that respect. And they don't even really want to try as the sun moves more towards sunset because they don't want to be laughed at or people ignore what they had to say completely. When we get to sunset, that can be very hard for a Leo placement. That can be a feeling like maybe the father wasn't around, either physically, like the father might have left, when you were younger in your life, or the father might have been working very hard and wasn't around, or when the father got home from work, the father didn't want to be bothered. They retreated to their Leo man cave or something along those lines. So there can be an issue with a departing father or an absent father if the sun is around sunset. Okay, because that's when the sun is disappearing. Okay, the day is ending. The light is being drawn, the streamers of light are being drawn down over the western horizon by the sun. And this can be a difficult place for someone whose sun is in Leo. Once we've kind of like gone below the horizon, there's that sense of like, okay, the day is done. And really, a sixth house placement for a Leo sun could be difficult because it's very much a house that's associated to work and service. And Leos don't really like feeling like they're subservient or that they're genuflecting to another person. And so that can be a very uncomfortable feeling. And you can sort of have what I call the cowardly lion Leo, the Leo that's very frightened or full of anxiety or hasn't really connected to the self, that they're going in search of their courage, and maybe they'll find it from the Wizard of Oz, sort of thing. It's like they've lost their courage somewhere along the way. Once we get past like an 8 p.m. birth, let's say, once we get into the evening, this is the entertainer Leo. This is the actor, the actress, or the artist Leo. They've got their groove again. They're in a position where the sun is trining the ascendant, and this is a good thing. And this would bring about this placement, this fifth house placement for a Leo sun is going to bring about arts and entertainment, sports, and also children. And that child theme continues from late evening into midnight and the changeover of day. Leos born at midnight or in the hours approaching midnight are very paternal. That applies to the male and the female Leos, the lions and the lionesses, the Leos and the leonesses. Okay, it's a very paternal placement. It's a placement where you can say, where I am is good. I'm going to stay where I am. I like where I am. I don't need to go to faraway cultures or prove myself or something. I like where I am. I like my nest. I like my home. I like my turf. I like my patch of land on the African plain. I'm going to hang out and enjoy the sun, so that tourists have to come and see me. People on safari come and see me, but have to drive around me. If I get up and want to saunter and walk very slowly, they all, pull away in admiration and taking cameras and things like this. This is a Leo that's very comfortable with itself, a Leo down at the base of the chart like this. And with the sun and Leo down at the base of the chart like this, the paternal line, the father, is also really important. Now, in that section of the chart, houses 3, 2, and 1, okay, midnight is really the start of the new day, because midnight is when the sun passes from one day and into the next. This was associated in Egypt with the barge, where the sun would set at the end of the day and enter into the underworld. And it was on this barge where it would go through the underworld at night. I remember in school when I learned that, I always sort of imagined, the sun sort of goes to sleep at night on a barge and it, floats through the underworld. That's not what happened in Egyptian mythology. The sun battled dark spirits in the evening. Okay. And so the sun is eternally battling dark spirits that are trying to sink the barge of the sun or overwhelm the barge of the sun. So it's struggling to rise again. And I always found that really fascinating. What that says to me about people born under Leo during this period of time, you might be comfortable with yourself, but you might not feel recognized. You might not feel seen. And that becomes like a wound. That becomes a pain. That becomes something that really bothers you. And when people sort of overlook you or attack you or insult you, that might be something that you really take seriously. It's like the sun with the army of Egyptian attending gods and deities who are firing arrows at creatures of the night that are trying to sink the barge. So this rising up into the new day, remember, the sun will rise at, basically 6 a.m. The sun will rise at that point. The sun will rise at the rising sign or the ascendant point. The sun is struggling to rise. Once the sun rises, it's rising. It's in daylight if you're born after sunrise. But this period of time when the sun is approaching sunrise, it's a struggle. Think of it as almost trying to wake up, trying to wake from a dream, wake from a sleepiness. This is what the sun is doing. It's also a very youthful sun, but it's youthful like a child, especially when you look at the third house, which is the house of early education and the house of children. Fifth house is children, but children with other children, fraternizing with other children is the third house. So the sun is struggling to wake. It's struggling to exert its power, but it can also be easily discouraged. It can be easily told, fine, Billy, that was a wonderful answer, but I really want to hear what Samantha has to say, and Samantha answers whatever. And Samantha, that was wonderful. And Billy is like forlorn and forgotten. These are the sorts of things that could be associated to this placement. So that when the sun rises on a new day, its rays come beaming over the dark horizon and it really begins the day. And so these are sort of the ideas that I would share with you about the way that Leos can feel the differences in their solar strength depending on the time of day that they were born. Now, when you're born under the zodiac sign of Leo, owning yourself, declaring yourself is very important. Now, there are Leos, like I said before, who have no problem owning the self, declaring themselves, okay? They've been doing it since they were like a little baby, and when their magnetism and the charisma or their sweet smile would draw people to peer over the crib and be like, oh, what a sweet little baby. And they would cuddle and play and hold and carry and embrace. These are the Leos who have exhibited their solar energy, their solar power with that fabulous smile that people respond to, and they're good. But as I said before, not all Leos have this ownership of self. There are some Leos who may put it on as a pretense but they don't feel really comfortable with it. And there may be other Leos who just feel totally ignored and neglected, like maybe their parents wanted another kid or something like that. So owning self is really important. Now, what does owning self mean, right? What does owning yourself mean? The, I remember when I was learning writing, a teacher of mine very early on would say, Christopher, I think you're going to be a good writer, but you don't have a voice. And I was like, don't have a voice. I remember being completely, scandalized by the idea, don't have a voice. I mean, I was usually the loudest person in class, but the teacher would say, you're trying on different voices, you're trying on different styles, and I don't feel like you found yourself, And I was like, all right. That's what I'm talking about, owning yourself or declaring yourself. Let's go with Lion King, for instance, which is based on Henry V, okay? What we have here is Simba is the golden child. He's the prince. Everyone knows that he's going to take over the kingdom one day. But that doesn't mean that Simba's going to start out particularly noble or particularly caring about other people. So Simba, in his adolescence, was sort of hanging out with, what is it? I think it's a mongoose. Is it a mongoose and it's a wild boar or something like that? They're his buds. They're the people that he's hanging out with. And he's kind of like living an easygoing, carefree life. He knows he's special. He knows he's born to this sort of royalty, but he doesn't know it. He's not that. He's a far cry from that. Then circumstances, situations take place, and he finds himself in line at the throne where he has to declare his rulership, okay, of his pride and over his animal people, his animal kingdom, okay. And he has to declare himself and he has to rise to the occasion of himself. And so, in Henry V, Henry V is a prince who's hanging out with Falstaff in taverns and drinking too much, and he finds out he's to become king. And the first thing that he does is that he divorces himself from Falstaff. Those days of play and joviality are over. It's time for me to be the king. So he grows into that self. So there can be a process where you grow into yourself or you find yourself because of obligations, circumstances, something that's been pressed upon you. You have to step up to the plate, as a Leo and declare who you are. And that could be an example of it. Another one, and this is where it's kind of like Mars in a way. Mars is the planet named after the Roman god of war. Okay, it fights, and usually Mars will fight for what it wants. The Mars and the sun are very much synced in with one another. They're very much simpatico because the sun is kind of like the commander, the king. The sun says, I want that. And Mars is like, on it. Mars will go and make sure you get to the front of the line. Mars will go and make sure that you get what you want. The sun without a Mars expects people to recognize that they should give what they have to it, but isn't necessarily going to say that. Whereas Mars is going to be, I want that. It's going to move people aside and fetch and grab it. All right. So if you don't have a strong Mars in your chart, for instance, you may find yourself in bullying situations where people bully you. And not a strong Mars can be something like a Mars in detriment, a Mars in fall. Okay, when I say a Mars in detriment, that's going to be a Mars in a Venus ruled sign like Taurus or Libra, or Mars in fall like in Cancer. Or it can just be Mars not in a very strong place. You will draw into your life people who almost bully you or shove you in some way. And Mars is behind this. It's making you a target of this kind of hostility or bullying. It's doing it in order to wake you up to your Mars. It's what we would call fighting back, like when someone's like, you're a person I can shove around or whatever. And it's like, no. And friends are like, fight back. And the audience watching the play of the movie is like, fight back. And, oh, no. And then suddenly, I will fight back. And they fight back and hero. Okay. If you don't have a strong Mars, it will bring Marsy types of energy into your life until you express, own, and exhibit your strong Mars. Now, if you're a Leo and your sun isn't strongly placed in the chart, okay, i.e. daytime would be nice, or we've got other places, maybe angular, something like that, or trining the ascendant, sextiling it. But if your sun isn't strongly placed, if you don't own yourself, this doesn't mean knowing who you are. Okay. I just want to clarify that. This doesn't mean like, I know I'm really talented ballerina, or I know I'm really good at math. It doesn't mean that. What it means is self. This is who I am, right? And you don't treat me like that. This is who I am, a figure of respect, a figure to be honored, someone to be listened to, those solar qualities that I was describing earlier. If that's not owned by you, you will draw people into your life who will own it for you. Now, there are Leos who will struggle with that, where they feel literally, metaphorically, or even literally eclipsed by another personality. It's a stronger personality. Someone who takes up all the oxygen in the room, I think is the current phrase for it. And the Leo would just kind of like be in attendance too, almost reflect that person's personality. But there are also situations in which the stronger personality comes into your life and it becomes about battling for that, When you look at J.K. Rowling's chart, Mars is in detriment. It's in the zodiac sign of Libra in the chart. And here, that means difficulty with partnership. And usually when we're talking about Libra, it's going to be spousal. Now, this doesn't mean for everyone who's got Mars in Libra, like, you just ended up with a difficult marriage. Mars will always cause trouble in the sign that it's there. Sometimes it's just to cause trouble, and sometimes it's to rouse you to action, to own the Mars, in the same regard that I'm saying to own the self. So here, with a Mars in detriment, that indicates trouble with a spouse or partner. We know from what she has described that she had a relationship with an abusive husband, that she says hit her. And in an interview, he says, yes, I used to hit her and not think anything of it. So there was no regard for her. Okay. And she was being abused in this relationship. I don't really know what her relationship was with her father. I suspect it wasn't a good father. Either the father was difficult or the father was distant or absent. That's kind of the impression that I get. And so she may have gone looking for father, okay, in another person. Now you might say like, oh, Christopher, are you getting Freudian on us? A woman has to look for father with man, things like that. I'm not getting Freudian with you, okay? I'm keeping this astrological, okay? As a Leo, she responds to father energy because she herself has a paternal energy. I would say a paternal more than a maternal, okay? So she may have gone looking for that kind of like good father. Either she was fathering the husband or she expected the husband to be the proper husband and father. She has her first child with this fellow. But things get very difficult for the two of them. I think it's like in the 92, 93 period. And this is a period of time when Saturn, for the first time, is forming an opposition to her sun. And so the sun is in Leo and Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, forming an opposition in this 92, 93 period where things really reach a crescendo. I think it's 93. And what's going on here is that an opposition is complete opposites. It's like, I often describe it as Congress. Okay, they're completely polarized, these energies, but you can see what's going on. Okay, the planet is as far away from you as you can get, and you can see what's going on. And when you have something like a Saturn Sun opposition, that sense of self feels like it's being judged. It feels like it's being criticized. It feels like it's being abandoned or left in some sort of way. And so she would have felt very not herself during this period. And everything that she tried to do, which she was familiar with expressing herself, standing up for herself, being who she is, wasn't working. It wasn't moving what might have been a very stern or unfeeling marriage or a very stern or unfeeling partner or the partner might have been simply experiencing stress and taking it out on her. This is the period of time, as I said, she gives birth to her first child, a daughter, which is very important. Remember, she's a Leoness. She's a Leo. So the child, that golden child, is really, really important to her. All right. And it's also this period of time, 93, is this is during when she writes the first Harry Potter book. This is when she's working on the book. And she indeed says that her husband would sort of hold the manuscript hostage, keep it away from her. And think of that opposition. It's holding something from her, that she wants. And so this is what goes on with a Sun-Saturn opposition. Usually it's feeling very judged by an authority, and there's nothing that you can do to win that authority's approval or to make that authority happy. Also, Saturn is like the dark father, and it's Saturn in Aquarius. So there might have been something about the husband that was very withholding and very cold. And so there's this feeling that she's had this child, that he's holding the manuscript hostage. She has this child, she has this Harry Potter manuscript, which might as well be like her child, okay? And so this is the thing that almost kind of pushes her to rise to the occasion of herself. She's either going to buckle under that Saturn opposition, or she's going to rise to the occasion of herself. Now, the thing that I would like to point out here is that J.K. Rowling has a Singleton planet. Okay. Now, what's a Singleton planet? When I was learning astrology, a Singleton was one planet in an element, and that was like your only planet in an element. There are charts in which we have 4 elements in astrology, right? We have water, earth, air, and fire. And what you sort of look for is a balance of all the elements. Well, that doesn't really happen. Okay. Not with all those stelliums that came out in the 1990s. Okay. Like that doesn't really happen. And you can have charts in which there's no element at all. But a singleton is a very powerful point. When you have one planet in one element, that's the only one it's in, it draws attention to itself. Just like you're having a party of people and everyone's, they came as couples and things like that. And then you have the one person who didn't come as a couple, and it draws attention. And even the singleton planet kind of feels like, I'm not in a couple, like, a type of thing. Now, if you've got a singleton Venus, it's no problem, because singleton Venus is like calling over all the spouses of the other people who are paired up. But anyway, in this situation, it's a singleton. And the singleton in J.K. Rowling's chart happens to be her sun, which is also her ruling planet. No matter where the sun is posited, remember, we do not know her birth time, so ignore the fact that it's at the top of the chart. It could be at the bottom of the chart for all we know. The sun is the singleton. So the sun, which is her ruling planet being singleton, the self is the most important thing to her, and those attributes that I already described with Leo, my individuality, my child, my home, who I am. This singleton sun is a light that never goes out. Remember, I talked about living in a globe of light for people born under Leo, who ruling planet is the sun. This light never goes out. It never extinguishes. Now, the positive side to a singleton can be an acceptance of, I have to do things on my own. Okay. It's not for someone else to do it. It's for me to do it. And so that becomes an expectation. Maybe she was born that way, understood it right off the bat, was a golden child as a kid, or maybe it's something that she was forced to accept through stronger personalities coming into her life who kind of force her to rise to the occasion of herself. Now, this carrying of the light, what strikes me here is so much, she has a child who's very beloved to her. I'll get into that in a moment. But what I want to stay here with is Harry Potter. Okay. Many artists or writers will talk about their work as being their baby, as being their child. Okay. And in many ways, I would imagine that Harry Potter, being the male heir to J.K. Rowling, to being the golden child, to sharing the same birthday, her carrying Harry Potter inside her through the toughest years. Okay. This is what's really important to understand about J.K. Rowling's chart. Harry Potter wasn't a lucky break. The creation of Harry Potter wasn't a lucky break. Harry Potter wasn't a lottery ticket that she got one day, like from Willy Wonka's chocolate factory or something like that, that all of a sudden, you're recognized for what you've done and now you're going to be lifted into a whole. No, Harry Potter wasn't even an ambition. Harry Potter was a child. Harry Potter was this orb of light within her. And so Harry Potter is like her child, but Harry Potter is also her legacy. It's more than, you know, J.K. Rowling wrote a really good poem or J.K. Rowling wrote a really wonderful book. She had mapped out 7 books, okay? She's working on the first book, but she had mapped out 7 books, which basically deal with the adolescence of this character, this character recognizing who he is, and in a world where people don't, just like Arthur is not recognized as being King Arthur until he's told to go and draw this sword out of the stone that everyone knows whoever draws it out of the stone will be king. And he needs to get a sword to give to the person he's apprenticing, because they're in a sword fight or something like that. And so he draws it out of the stone and goes and gives it to him, doesn't even think of it, and it's later on that people recognize, that's the sword, they put it back in the stone and he has to draw it out of the stone again, and he doesn't. So he's been recognized. This is almost like Sword in the Stone for J.K. Rowling, okay, the Harry Potter. Harry Potter's her child, Harry Potter's her legacy. And that's where I really sort of want to invoke the image of the phoenix. I know the phoenix plays a very strong role in the Harry Potter books, but the phoenix is a solar bird. It's a legendary bird, and it's a very peculiar bird. It's a bird that is often associated in astrology with Scorpio because it's the idea of rising from the ashes, and that's okay. That can work. Although my idea of Scorpio rising from the ashes is less the phoenix as it is Vivian Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara in silhouette against the sunset, at the ruins of the plantation, bowing with a fist shaking at heaven, I will never go hungry again, which ends the first act of Gone with the Wind, okay? To me, that's more Scorpio. There's more of a defiance to that rising from the ashes. The phoenix was actually regarded as a solar bird, a Leo bird, more than a Scorpio or a Pluto type of bird, or even a Mars bird. The phoenix, if you're not familiar with it, is the story of a mythical bird that lives, I think it's 500 years, and it has plumes of gold and brown and purple. I mean, it's this magnificent, beautiful Arabian bird, and it lives for 500 years. Some would say 1,000 years. And so at the end of its life, what it does is that it builds a nest of spices, okay, under the rays of the sun. So it doesn't build this nest at night. It builds this nest under the rays of the sun, the full sun, the sun at its brightest, so that the sun lights the nest. The phoenix itself spontaneously combusts. It's lit on fire. It burns in fire, in immolation on this nest of spices, and it waves its wings. We're familiar with those images as it burns to death. And as it burns to death, out of the ashes comes a new phoenix. I think sometimes it's a worm, sometimes it's a smaller, younger bird, but it comes out of these ashes, okay, of the funeral pyre of its former self, of its father. And the first thing that it does when it comes of age is that it will collect the ashes, which was its crib, but its father's tomb, and it will fly this. It's almost kind of like a ball. It will fly this ball to Heliopolis, which was the city of the sun, Helios and Polis city. So Heliopolis, the city of the sun, in Egypt, where it enshrines its father on shelves which carry the balls, the eggs, the cribs, the tombs, this thing that it flew. Well, there's a collection of them. They're collected in this temple in Heliopolis, where the entire legacy of all the birds that have come before are housed and where they are kept. And so, in deference to its father, the previous generation, the phoenix leaves this here and then it flies away to live its 500 years of life. The reason why it's more solar than it is Plutonian is the phoenix never descends down into the underworld. Okay. We have lots of stories, lots of myths of deities that descend down into the underworld, whether it's Inanna descending down into the underworld of Ereshkigal, or whether it's Orpheus descending down into the underworld to plead with Pluto for him to give him back his beloved Eurydice. So there are journeys of the underworld, and those are very Plutonian. The phoenix never journeys to the underworld. It combusts in fire. It's like the sun that sets on the horizon. There's that blaze of that sunset before it goes into dark. And then on a new day, the sun reappears. And so it's the phoenix bird, burns in its ashes. And then from the ashes comes the next incarnation, okay, which some regard as the same bird. And it's immortal, almost like it's transporting its shells of former selves to the city in Heliopolis. And so it's keeping its legacy. And this is a very important word for Leo. Legacy, the siring of the prince, the siring of the princess, the siring of the golden children, people who will continue the family name. So this legacy is very, very important to Leo. And the Phoenix is a story that's very much in keeping with that. So in many ways, J.K. Rowling is fighting for the birth of this golden child, this Harry Potter, much like the parents themselves sacrificed themselves for Harry against Voldemort, and Harry carries the lightning as a symbol. And so she's doing the same thing. She's enduring this abusive relationship. She's thrown out of the house. She comes back with the police to collect her daughter, her infant daughter, and her manuscript. She moves to Scotland. She depends on the kindness of her sibling, her only sister, and of friends who help her out. She applies for government funding, for unemployment, and she writes Harry Potter under that aegis, under that sponsorship. It's very, if you think about it, Jupiter in Gemini, okay? Because Gemini, of course, is ruled by Mercury, the planet of scribes, and Jupiter is the benevolent figure, okay? And Gemini is sibling and friend. So very much the Jupiter in Gemini is there, and it shows up. So she writes Harry Potter during her first Saturn return. The Saturn opposite the sun is really the feeling as far away from herself as she could possibly feel. That's what an opposition to Saturn is. I am so off track with who I am. She was setting up what she thought was a family. This would have spoken to her Leo sun, only to realize that, the husband was abusive and she was at risk of loss of self. I don't know how extreme the physical threats were. Beating sounds pretty extreme to me. In addition, on a psychological, psychic level, there's a loss of self. And so she has to leave. This is why oppositions are associated with separations, splits, divorces. She has to leave this, and she has to take the things that are the most important things to her daughter and her manuscript, and go back to Scotland to write this. So this is going on during her first Saturn return. Her Saturn, as I pointed out, is in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. And a Saturn return takes place between the ages of 28 and 30. And it will always ask this one pertinent question, which is, who am I going to be when I grow up? Okay, so Saturn returns have always been seen as rites of passage. And certainly with what I've just described to you, that's a hell of a rite of passage. In addition to this rite of passage is the birthing of Harry Potter, is the writing of Harry Potter. And indeed, in 1995, when Saturn is over her own Saturn, okay, another planet that pivots Pluto, planet of the underworld, um, planet of ordeals, and the transformations that arise from them. Pluto moves from Scorpio, where it's been squaring her singleton sun. Okay, if you've got like one planet in that sign, that planet kind of like owns the whole sign there. It's also a ruling planet. So even though her sun is like at, I don't know, maybe it's 6 or 8 degrees, it owns all 30 degrees of Leo. Okay. So because it's the ruler of that entire sign. So with Pluto in Scorpio forming a square to it, that period from 83 to 95 would have been her underworld journey, would have been where she felt like she was losing the things that were precious, that were special. That was her life. That whole period would have been a very difficult time. So we've got this Saturn return in 1995. Pluto in 1995 moves out of Scorpio and enters Sagittarius. It's kind of like having been in the catacombs or having been down in the caves for a long period of time, and then suddenly, there's a rise in the ground that the path that you're following, and it leads to light. All right. And so with Pluto moving from Scorpio to Sagittarius in 1995, Pluto goes from squaring, combating, fighting, trying to trying to bury her sun into the zodiac sign of Sagittarius, which is fire. Leo is a fire sign. Sagittarius is a fire sign. Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them, is co-ruler of Scorpio. So it really set off its army of darkness. Remember the barge that carries the sun at night into the underworld, and the sun has to, employ its army of archers to fight back. This is what her life must have felt like from 83 to 95. And then it rounds the bend, and Pluto enters Sagittarius, and suddenly it's trining that sun in Leo. It's suddenly empowering that sun in Leo. It's suddenly saying, here is the light, And so the test, which coincides with the Saturn return in Pisces, is, who are you? Which, some of us might be like, I don't know who I am. For Leo, you have to answer, I am myself. Okay, you have to answer, I am myself. And here she answers, I am myself, at a time when she is writing, and I believe also in 1995, she sells Harry Potter. Okay, Harry Potter as a manuscript, after being rejected, is sold in 1995. So this is an incredible moment of rising from the ashes. This is an incredible moment of carrying the golden orb of her legacy, to her future, which is at this point is unknown. It's hopeful, but it's not known. She doesn't know what Harry Potter is going to turn into. Now, just to sort of show you here, Pluto is in Sagittarius from 1995 till 2008, when it enters the zodiac sign of Capricorn. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is released in 1997, when Pluto is at 3 degrees Sagittarius, approaching her sun. Chamber of Secrets is released in 1998, when Pluto is at 5 degrees Sagittarius, approaching her sun. Prisoner of Azkaban is released in 1999, when Pluto is at 8 degrees Sagittarius, forming a perfect trine to her sign. Okay, so I would say like the 99 and the 2000 period is probably like the peak period. The Goblet of Fire is released in 2000. Pluto is at 10 degrees Sagittarius. Order of the Phoenix is released in 2003. Pluto is at 18 degrees Sagittarius. And Half-Blood Prince is released in 2005. Pluto's at 22 Sagittarius. And Deathly Hallows is released in 2007. Pluto is 26 degrees Sagittarius. Now, some astrologers might say, like, whoa, Christopher, are you like, how big's that orb you're working with? And an orb is really, think of the orb of light. How large is that planetary influence that we're going to give? If we see the sun at 8 degrees Sagittarius, you give roughly maybe 10, 12-ish degrees on either side or whatever. And that's about it. It's not supposed to cover the entire sign. but it does cover the entire sign. Why? It covers the entire sign because it's a singleton. Okay, there's no other planet in this zodiac sign. The sun in Leo doesn't genuflect to any other zodiac sign. It only resides in Leo. And so all aspects at any degree of the zodiac sign of Leo are going to impact J.K. Rowling because she owns the entire 30 degrees of Leo on the chart. And indeed, after Deathly Hallows is published in 2007, Pluto leaves Sagittarius and enters Capricorn in 2008. And that's pretty much the end of the 7 books that she had envisioned for Harry Potter. That is the end of the books. Now, this singleton, which is the sun, this orb of light, the power of this orb of light, what's the negative aspect of a singleton? The negative aspect of a singleton Leo sun is that because the sun is the ruler of Leo, Leo is ruled by the sun is the ruling planet, Leo's ruled by self, okay, the majesty of self, the individuality. What can happen if you're living in a golden globe of light is that you have a blind spot when it comes to yourself, okay? This isn't, the moon looking down at the waters and seeing her face reflected, okay? Or the moon reflecting the light of the sun. Okay, reflection is something that we attribute, for instance, to the moon, right? The sun is doing the shining, all right? If it's singleton, it takes those ideas of uniqueness, specialness, maybe even a royalty, and it exaggerates it. It gives it super duper power. Now, my feeling is if it were trining other planets and fire signs, that would help with the understanding of self. Like, for instance, if there were Aries or Sagittarius in her chart that was trining or working with the sun, it would balance out the energy. It would send the energy to different parts of the chart through a trine, through a sympathy, through an understanding. But the sun stands out in its singletonness. Okay, it's single, and so it becomes single-minded. All right, so it's a blind spot when it comes to itself. It's not able to see outside the orb of light, and so there can be, sort of like a what I say goes type of thing. But what I've seen it show up as is really what I feel is right. What I think is right. What I say is right. And what Leos can do, and I've seen it a lot happen with their own children, seen it happen to themselves, is that Leos assume that if they can't do something, then you can't do it either. Okay. And this is something that I've seen show up with their relationship with children. Let's say a Leo parent wasn't that good at math and their kid excels at math. And the Leo parent wants to be encouraging of the kid, but at the same time, like, I wasn't good at math. I don't see how you're going to be good at math. And I don't want you to do something that's going to really be a disappointment or make you feel bad about yourself. So without meaning to, the Leo parent almost puts like a limit, a ceiling of glass, like an atmosphere, the way that our planet's atmosphere creates our blue sky. They kind of like put someone in an orb. If I can't see that, or if I can't do that, or if I can't think that, or if I can't feel that, I don't see how you can. Okay. So this is kind of, it's not egotistical. It's just a natural, like, I'm a Leo. My ruling planet is the sun. I bring the daylight. I bring the heat. I'm a Leo. I bring the party. I bring the fun. I bring the name recognition. I bring the joy. And if I can't do that, I don't see how anyone else can do it. It's literally not being able to see beyond that orb of light, right? It's often mistaken as self-involvement, but I think it's just a natural way for Leos, particularly a singleton sun in Leo, to register themselves in an environment. They don't really see how someone else can see it, not naturally, not sympathetically, all right? And so that can be the downside of the singleton. Remember, at the back of every Leo's mind is the idea of the usurper, All right. We know the story of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter comes and overthrows his father. It's prophesied one day that he will. Lions aren't going to stay at the top of that pride. They might be at the top of the food chain, but they're not going to stay at the top. Male lions aren't going to stay at the top of that pride. And at some point, because time catches up to them, they're going to be usurped. They're going to be thrown out, and that is left to grow ill and die, and their children killed. So Leos kind of have this real personal involvement or investment in that of not being usurped. Leos themselves will usurp. If it's a good father and they register it as a good father, then this is an understood thing through succession, or you're a great grandfather to my kids. It gets worked out that way. But if it's a father that hasn't stood up, a father who hasn't been good, a father who hasn't really provided or been there, then the Leo child will usurp that father's place, and claim it for her own or claim it for his own. But what I really want to focus on here in J.K. Rowling's chart is the stellium in Virgo, a stellium of planets in the zodiac sign of Virgo. And when you look here, you see that there are 5 planets in the zodiac sign of Virgo. There's Mercury, Venus, Uranus, Pluto, and the moon. And so Virgo is a very different zodiac sign than Leo is. She has her sun in Leo. It's a singleton sun. It rules the entire sign. We've done the Leo statement. But here now we see 5 out of 10 planets that you can have in an astrological chart appearing in the zodiac sign of Virgo. Virgo to me is such a special sign, okay? In astrology, there's only one zodiac sign that's represented as a woman, that's represented as a female figure, and that's Virgo. If you look at the other zodiac signs, you'll see horns and manes or bare-chested men. Okay, so it's very patriarchal. In the 2,500 plus years of astrology, there was a lot of patriarchy going on here, okay? And you see it with Aries the ram and the horns, and the bull with its horns, and the Leo and its mane. We all know that a mane on a lion is a male lion. We see it with Sagittarius, its oiled chest, taking out its bow and arrow and shooting it, and we see it with Aquarius, who's also just wears a little robe around his midsection, who's carrying water. Okay, so we see these real male figures. We don't really know the gender of the crab, the scorpion, or the fish, but for the most part, to our eye, all the figures are male. Now, in recent years, people would make adjustments because they didn't want it to be so male, and they would turn Aquarius into a woman, or the twins into, but if you're talking about astrology for 2,500 plus years, it's very patriarchal, and it reflects the patriarchal culture in which it thrived. Virgo is such a fascinating sign. I personally refer to it as the feminist sign of the zodiac, all right? The entire history of women, 2,500 plus years in the West, is pretty much sized up in Virgo, okay? And Virgo is such a mass of contradictions. Often referred to as the maiden in older astrology books, Virgo was really associated to an unmarried woman, okay? Now, that could be an unmarried woman as a maiden. She's chaste, she's virginal, and all these sorts of things. But it also referred to women who were not marriageable, who didn't succeed in getting married, who were kind of like left to serve the family house because they couldn't, make a marriage deal for them. So what did you do with a woman on her own? And in history, women on their own might have been sent to convents or to brothels or to harems, and so this is why Virgo not only rules over women and women's interests, but Virgo also rules over groups of women, whether it was a convent, a brothel, or a harem, or it could be a sorority, women's clubs. It rules over groups of women. It's a sisterhood that you feel by being a woman, particularly that you feel by being a woman in a man's world. Now, there's a very strong impulse that goes through Virgo. One of the phrases that I use with Virgo that I like to use when I'm reading for a Virgo is the phrase, "You don't own me." Okay. And this is very important to a Virgo. What it comes from, particularly in ancient Greece, where astrology was practiced and actually went through a sort of repackaging period. Okay. In ancient Greece, women were disposable. All right. They were completely disposable. Ancient Greece was a very patriarchal, very male dominated society. And there are some ideas about that. One of them being that there were originally goddess cults that had been taken over by male god cults, been superseded, overrun. But in ancient Greece, in a lot of the legends and the myths, women are disposable. Societally, women were disposable. If you had a woman child, it was not as valuable as a male child. You really wanted a son to continue the family line. You didn't want a woman. And so the next best thing that you could do with a girl child was marry her off. And many girls were married off around the age of 12 or 13 in ancient Greece. And they were often married to men who were 28. So the whole idea of treating a girl like a child was literally true because these men were marrying children. All right. 12 to 13 being, very, very prime childbearing years. Okay. Because that's what a woman could do. She could bear a child and continue the family line. It's one thing a woman can do that a man can't, which is to have a child. And that's what makes them so desirable and you wanted to be married if you wanted to continue your family line. But it's also something that made the husbands, very, I don't know if I can trust her. She'd been sleeping around behind my back. So women also became the targets of jealousy and envy and possession. And until recently, a woman's property was owned by her husband. She could have come from more money than the husband did, but the husband, being a man, would take over the ownership of that property, would take over the family name. She didn't keep her family name until recently, and the money and property would go to the husband. The mortality rate of women dying in childbirth was also very, very high in ancient times. And so the attitude was, and I'm speaking generally here, but the attitude was, well, if my wife died in childbirth, I'll just go and get a new one. So this disposability is very much part of the Virgoan psyche. Virgo is a zodiac sign that's connected to work, health, and service. So Virgo, we have to remember, has a ruling planet, and the ruling planet of Virgo is Mercury, which is the mind. Mercury is also the scribe, the writer, okay? But Mercury is also the planet of the mind. And we have many women in history, whether it's Scheherazade or Penelope from the Odyssey, many women in history and legends who outwit men, okay? And they do it through service. They do it through, being of service to the man. And as servants know, all you have to do is watch Downton Abbey. You serve long enough to someone who lords over you, and you get to, you wait on them hand and foot, right? Well, you become more familiar with their hands and feet than they are after a while. And if you serve someone, the master, nowadays it's a boss or a supervisor, begins to rely on you more, okay? Begins to give you certain responsibilities, or can you take care of this? Or they listen to your opinion, your advice more. Well, how would you do this? How would you clean this window? Or how would you do such a thing? Or, Millie, I'm really upset with you. You didn't show up last week for housework. And what am I going to do? I'm lost without you. I mean, we all learned how important service and people who work in service industry was during the pandemic, when the essential workers were glorified for being the people that we all relied on and for also being horribly underpaid. And this is something that sticks in the back of the craw of the Virgo, which is, I am a servant, I am not a slave. I will work for you, but I will not be owned by you. I will not be exploited by you. And I sure won't be put out on the street like so much garbage. So what a Virgo will do through service is make themselves indispensable. Okay. The point is, and this is how women, one of the many different strategies and ways that women asserted themselves, but one of them was to make themselves indispensable. I'm the person that you rely on for advice. I'm the person you rely on to raise the family. I'm the person you rely on to, help figure out what a problem is. And so this was ways that in the ancient world that women could find ways of exercising influence, in these societies. So Virgo carries all of this in an astrological chart. Virgo, it's the idea that, if you're going to live in a man's world, and back then it was a man's world, how do you survive in it? And how do you, more importantly, thrive in it? And the answer, obviously, was to be better at playing the game than the men were, to familiarize yourself with the rules, to familiarize yourself with the needs, to familiarize yourself with the way that things are done. And by mastering those rules, you master the game. And because Mercury is the planet of the mind, it's the planet of cunning, of problem solving, you learn to outwit and you learn to outmaneuver. You learn to make yourself indispensable. This outwitting, this outmaneuvering is very key to J.K. Rowling's chart. When we read a stellium, you read the planets in terms of which one rises over the horizon first. Okay, so when we read this stellium in Virgo, we see that the first planet to rise over the horizon that day would have been Mercury, followed by Venus, followed by Uranus, followed by Pluto, and then followed by the moon. We talked a lot about the father. We need to talk a little bit about mom, because mom would have been very important to J.K. Rowling. There are 3 signs of the mother in astrology. That's Cancer, the good mother, Scorpio, the dark mother. Again, this is based on seasons, times of year. Cancer, summer, abundance, Scorpio, autumn, fall. Virgo is the zodiac sign of the mother-daughter. So with Virgo, you've got this very strong bond between mother and daughter. And what it comes from is in Greek mythology, Virgo was often associated to Ceres or Demeter, the goddess of the grain. And she has a beloved daughter, Persephone. In fact, she was known for her daughter, Persephone. And Persephone is abducted. That's a story for another time. But different gods and goddesses were known by certain symbols. Zeus was known by his thunderbolt. Neptune was known by his trident. Mars was known for his sword. Mercury, the caduceus. Vesta, the flame. Athena, the owl. Well, Demeter was known for Persephone, okay, an unmarried woman raising a daughter on her own. So the idea of single motherhood is very much woven into the zodiac sign of Virgo and the beloved daughter and single motherhood. And so what we have here is Mercury leads the stellium and it rules the entire stellium. Mercury is the ruling planet of Virgo. And so it's the planet of the mind and it's the planet of scribes. And I think we know what J.K. Rowling is famous for. Okay, writing. Mercury is exalted. It's in its most celebrated placement when it's in Virgo. So this gives a wit that is wisdom. It gives a writing and an ability to speak, but with great conviction, being able to cite facts and stats, fluently. Okay, this gives this capability, it gives this quality. The Mercury is followed by Venus. And so Venus is in Virgo. Venus is is a planet that represents women. And so Venus in Virgo is certainly going to bring out the sisterhood, the solidarity of the female sex. We will not be disposed of. We will not be, thrown out on the side of the hill. We won't be dumped like garbage. We won't be treated like lesser than. Okay. And one of the reasons why Venus is in fall, has its most difficulty in the zodiac sign of Virgo, is Venus, being named after the goddess of love and beauty, always wants to partner, it always wants to pair, it always wants to be in a couple. Okay. Venus in Virgo doesn't want to be in a couple. Okay. It doesn't, that's not a really important thing. Venus in Virgo wants to celebrate her sisterhood. Okay. And she doesn't want to be defined by being in a couple because being in a couple comes from this history of the man owning everything that you had, including your body. Okay. So Venus and Virgo rebels against that. It says no to that. And so Venus in Virgo is very sensitive to that idea, and that I will not be beholden to a man. I will not be defined by a man. I will not be owned by a man. There's a sisters are doing it for themselves type of thing with the Venus in Virgo. That's why I often will describe Virgo as the feminist sign of the zodiac. We follow it with Uranus and Pluto. And this is very fascinating to me because you've got Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and change, right next to Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. J.K. Rowling is born in 1965, where everyone was experiencing the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo. Virgo has often been associated to the downtrodden or the underclasses, to people who couldn't protect themselves, people who were treated as servants, as servile, as subservient, as expendable. So Virgo has this real advocacy for the underdog or advocacy for the underclass, speaking up for people who are treated shabbily or can't speak for themselves. So this is very Uranus, would have revolutionized this. The 1960s is the decade where we really experience the culmination of civil rights under Martin Luther King Jr. here in the United States, where an entire part of the populace, the African American populace, was going to declare that they were part of society. They were no longer going to be treated as lesser thans or things that were disposable. So Uranus really sort of radicalizes this. It brings it to a boil. You have its conjunction with Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. So Pluto next to Uranus is pretty much, I'll do whatever it takes to create that place for myself at the table. If I'm marching in civil rights, I'm no longer going to be afraid. You've already done horrible things to my community. I'm not afraid of that anymore. What I'm after is my place at the table. What I'm after is my place in society. And of course, the civil rights was a tremendous influence and inspiration for feminism, the women's movement, which also starts in the 60s, and the gay rights movement, which also starts in the 60s. So these are all the fringe populace radicalizing, getting a voice, and doing whatever it takes to make a place for themselves at the table. And then you've got the moon, and the moon will represent the mother in an astrological chart. Now, you can read J.K. Rowling's mother as the moon. The moon is in the zodiac sign of Virgo. The moon, we know, rules the body. And Virgo is a zodiac sign very much associated to the body, particularly a woman's body. Okay, these are the themes that are connected with these placements. And because the moon is the fastest moving planet, it's already moved through Mercury, Venus, Uranus, and Pluto. You can sort of read the story of the mother here. With Mercury being the leader of the stellium, we know that her mother would have been highly intelligent, very, very smart woman and very, very conversational. We also know that because the moon would have passed over Mercury and then passed over Venus, we also know that the mother would have been very self-sufficient as a person. Virgo is a big believer in teaching people to be self-sufficient and teaching people to fend for themselves. That phrase, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man how to fish and he'll eat forever, is a very Virgoan phrase to me because it's the idea of teaching self-sufficiency. This is how you take care of yourself. There might also have been perhaps a tinge of feminism with J.K. Rowling's mother, a woman who really did believe that, women were men's equals, if not maybe even a little bit better. But certainly the mother-daughter bond would have been very powerful for her. And Virgo mothers tend to treat their daughters as sisters, so you have a mother who can be mothering, but also a mother who's going to treat you as an equal with that kind of a Virgo moon. The other thing that we could have seen is that her mother would have experienced unforeseen upsets in her life. And then finally, the moon passing over Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. We know that J.K. Rowling's mother suffered from MS, multiple sclerosis, and that it eventually took her life. And so these are all things that we can see with the moon passing over these planets. Now, if you have these planets in your chart or whatever, it doesn't say that this is what's going to happen. What it does is that we just simply take the context of things. We can see the high intelligence, that's a Mercury, Venus being self sufficient, Uranus having to manage unforeseen circumstances, and Pluto, the planet of ordeals and transformations that arise from them. These are the characters that appear in a story, and every person's chart is a particular story. The characters that appear in this one story, this might be their narrative, but the same characters or the same planets, like in a Virgo stellium, can appear in a different story. Same characters, same characteristics, but the story plays out differently. That's why I would read this as an example, which fits with J.K. Rowling's life, but your life might have a different twist, different version of how it plays out. But again, they might have involved, if you had a stellium like this, very shrewd, very smart mind, self-sufficiency. How do you deal with unpredictable events, and how do you manage or endure or go through periods of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them? Now, what I really want to focus on here is the Venus semi-sextile to the sun. The semi-sextile is a very important aspect to me. It's one that I used to not think of at all. But in recent years, I'm kind of obsessed with semi-sextiles and quincunxes. But anyway, the way that these two ideas come together is through the semi-sextile. Remember that the sun is a singleton. So J.K. Rowling's experience of herself is going to be intensely solar. It's going to be very sun-like. Okay, all those qualities that I associated and described with Leo earlier. The way that we bring in the Virgo is because the Venus forms a semi-sextile to the sun. In fact, it is the closest aspect that is formed to the sun, which makes it very powerful. All right. So a semi-sextile, what's a semi-sextile? Technically, a semi-sextile is a planet that's 30 degrees away from the planet that you're looking at. In this case, it's the sun. Okay. It's a planet that appears in the sign that either precedes your sun sign, for instance, let's take that as our example, or the sign that follows it. So any planet in Cancer would form a semi-sextile to a planet in Leo, just as any planet in Virgo would form a semi-sextile to a planet in Leo. Here they're almost exact, okay? And here I follow Lynn Bell's lead when she says that when you're looking at semi-sextiles, you want to keep the orb within 2 to 3 degrees. Okay, it's very, very tight. It's very, very small. So if the sun is appearing at 8 degrees Leo, Venus is appearing at 7 degrees Virgo. That's a semi-sextile. A semi-sextile is a blind spot in an astrological chart. Imagine you're driving down the highway and you want to turn lanes. And, a lot of people will look in their rearview mirror, use their side mirrors to turn lanes. I'm still, someone who looks over his shoulder, to make sure that no one's here in my blind spot. Because too many times I've looked over my shoulder and I've seen someone in my blind spot. So it talks about a close proximity between this planet and the next, but they don't really see each other, or one planet definitely doesn't see the other planet because it's in its blind spot. Remember that the sun in Leo is a singleton. It lives in an orb of golden light, and a very intense orbit of golden light because it's a sun in Leo and it's a singleton. That Venus in Virgo is semi-sextile the sun. So the Venus in Virgo is going to stand for all those things that I talked about women standing up for women, women standing by women, the sisterhood of women, a solidarity of women in a world in which men control the finances, the property, are in charge of the rules of the game, and that the only way that you can sort of make a place for yourself is to outwit, the people who are in charge of the rules of the game. So this kind of solidarity, this identification with women, and especially with women being disposed of or treated shabbily, is going to be very, very powerful, not only because of the stellium of planets in Virgo, but because of the semi-sextile of Venus, which will represent women in a chart, forming a semi-sextile to the sun. This is something that's important. This is something that's physically important. It's viscerally important to J.K. Rowling, the rights of women and the protection of women. This is going to be important. And she's going to be ferocious about it. Okay. It's a Singleton sun in Leo. She's a lioness about this. So here you have a sun in Leo, which is saying, I need to be the best that I can be. And then you have a Venus in Virgo. And Venus is the way that you relate to people, usually the way that you relate to people outside your home, outside your family. The moon will talk about relationships inside the family, and Venus will talk about relationships outside the family. So basically, neither planet really gets the other. The sun is focused on being the best that I can be, and Venus is focused on relating, how you get along with others. Now, the problem here is that they don't really see each other. You could almost say that there's a problem with what one would call identity politics. J.K. Rowling identifies with identity, okay, because the sun is what I know about myself to be true. It's all about identity. But Venus is about politics. Venus is about diplomacy. She's about finding ways for people to get along with other people. So if the sun becomes too self-righteous, for lack of a better word, it becomes too solar, it becomes, I'm about what's right, if the sun becomes too self-righteous, it becomes too hot, it becomes too heated, it doesn't really recognize the differences of other people. It recognizes that it's right and it's fighting for the rights of others in a very sort of righteous way. The problem begins to really sort of show itself in that J.K. Rowling may still see herself as an underdog when she actually has become an alpha dog. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the mutable T-square that exists in J.K. Rowling's chart. A T-square is basically two squares joined by an opposition, kind of like the letter T, if you think about it. Okay, so on one hand, we have Uranus and Pluto at 12 and 15 degrees Virgo, forming a square to Jupiter at 22 degrees Gemini. And then on the other end, we have Jupiter at 22 degrees Gemini, forming a square to Saturn and Chiron, both in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Saturn at 16 degrees Pisces and Chiron at 22 degrees Pisces, respectively. The T-square becomes complete when we bring in the Uranus and Pluto in Virgo opposition to Saturn and Chiron in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Simply put, J.K. Rowling is no stranger to controversy. J.K. Rowling has twice faced the ire of large movements that couldn't have been more different. On one hand, she was targeted by right-wing Christians who were trying to ban her books for Satanism in the classroom. That was in 2001, when Jupiter happened to be in Gemini, by the way. And then on the other hand, she was targeted, or rather canceled, by the LGBTQ community, who was accusing her of transphobia. What's fascinating here is that in both situations, we have the theme of children. The concern of the welfare of children was involved. The right-wing Christians wanted to ban her books, feeling like they were converting school children to Satanism and to witchcraft. And on the other hand, the LGBT community wanted to cancel her because they felt like her comments were transphobic and harmful to LGBTQ youth. The irony is that the very US laws deciding whether Rowling's books could be banned by school boards are now precedents that help protect LGBTQ literature from contemporary religious efforts to ban them, which is an interesting read of the Jupiter in Gemini. In 2018, Rowling sparked off a war of words, or shall I say a war of tweets, between her and the trans community when she liked a transphobic tweet. This escalated into a nasty exchange over what defines a woman. Rowling's stance that a woman was defined biologically and physically, that sex itself is physical, and that people who were trans women were basically intruding on women's spaces, whether those women were heterosexual or whether those women were gay. Now, the trans community took this as a very painful slight and an insult. They felt very much that she was trundling on their rights to be seen, on their dignity, showing no respect for their positions. Their statement that trans women are women was echoed by Daniel Radcliffe just a couple of years later, along with other allies. And so this became a very volatile fight between the two, where Rowling felt that trans women were basically men in sheep's clothing, men who were passing themselves off as women, who were intruding on women's spaces, co opting women's history, and showing women to be lesser than. You can see what would have triggered this with her by our discussion of the stellium and Virgo. And trans women felt very much harmed by what Rowling was saying, very much bullied, and that she was being very verbally and psychologically and spiritually abusive. There was a tremendous sense of betrayal that they felt about the author of the Harry Potter novels, someone who had really been an advocate for gay rights, that she was drawing this line in the sand. The question that was sort of showing up was, why was she so adamant about this? Why was she so ferocious about this? Why was she so invested? So it went from explanations of her position or of her stance to really malicious attacks, mocking attacks against the trans community. And so this is what really became very embattled situation. So this embattled situation where Rowling was showing tremendous disrespect and was being very derisive of the trans community, and where the trans community was firing back with wanting to cancel J.K. Rowling and calling upon its allies to boycott all the Harry Potter books, this peaked in August of this year. In August 2024, when the Algerian boxer Imani Khelif had to file a lawsuit against J.K. Rowling for cyberbullying. Now, this particular controversy sparked during the Summer Olympics, when Khelif, who was competing for boxing, for the gold in boxing, when her opponent dropped out of their bout seconds into the match, saying that she had never felt a punch like this. Now, in recent years, the Boxing Federation claimed that Khelif had failed 2 unspecified gender tests, but Olympic officials said that those tests were illegitimate. In fact, Khelif, 25, had competed in women's boxing for years and had the same record of wins and losses as anyone else. Khelif was born as a girl, it's listed on her birth certificate, is registered as female on her passport, and has fought at the senior level for years with no problem. None of this succeeded in convincing Rowling, who joined Elon Musk and Donald Trump, among others, in denouncing Imani Khelif as a man passing as a woman. In her message to her 14.2 million followers on X, Rowling posted a photo from the fight, accusing Khelif of being a man who was, quote, enjoying the distress of a woman he's just punched in the head. Now, the lawsuit that Khelif filed in August 2024 coincides with Jupiter again being in Gemini. It returns every 12 years to the place where it was at the time of your birth. But this time, Jupiter in Gemini is forming a square to Saturn in Pisces. This is what we would call a repeat Jupiter-Saturn square, or a Jupiter-Saturn square return in J.K. Rowling's chart. So let's go ahead and break down what the square is telling us here. First of all, the square is impacting the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in J.K. Rowling's chart. This conjunction deals with upsets, ordeals, and the transformations that arise from them. They're very volatile. And as I mentioned before, this conjunction basically was going on during the 60s, where we had the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and the LGBTQ movement starting out. So in one corner, we have the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo, which is very volatile, and which is very much about fighting for the rights of those who have been oppressed. It's a standing up for those who have been downtrodden and fighting back, not wanting those rights or those gains to be taken away. Because it's a Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo, this is very much going to be espoused as women's rights. This is the thing that's going to be very important. Opposite, okay, in this other corner, okay, is the Saturn Chiron in Pisces conjunction that's also being triggered by the square. Now, Saturn in Pisces is what I often refer to as the child left on the footsteps of a church planetary placement. People who have Saturn in Pisces feel a wound in having been wounded, would probably be the simplest and the quickest way of describing that. It's a feeling of not belonging. It's a feeling of not being loved. They can have the most loving people around them, but it's a feeling like somehow they're apart from that. It's often described as a coldness. I see it more showing up as a feeling of being apart from, not really being welcomed, not really being part of the group, of having been abandoned. And so there can be a history of suffering and pain with a Saturn in Pisces, but at the same time, because Saturn resents weakness, okay, it resents having been humbled or been made weak. It resents having been overthrown or hurt or harmed or rejected. It's going to become defensive around that. What can happen sometimes with people who have Saturn and Pisces in their astrological chart is there is a feeling that they have suffered. I mean, it's more than a feeling. They have experienced suffering or they have experienced rejection, but there's a feeling that one should be tight-lipped about it, that one should have a stiff upper lip about it. You don't go and talk about the things that you've suffered. You need to be tough about it. And what can happen, especially when you involve or you bring in Chiron in Pisces. Chiron in Pisces, Chiron is an asteroid. It refers to the wounded healer. Chiron will always point out the wound in your chart that you will never heal yourself, but that you can potentially heal in other people. So a Chiron in Pisces knows that they've been victimized or that they've suffered, that they've felt pain, but they can also feel a bit guilty about it, guilty about feeling pain, guilty about having suffered. And so there can be almost a shame element that can be involved in that. So when you combine the Saturn and the Chiron together in Pisces, you have had someone who suffered, but at the same time, they can be a little judgmental about the suffering of other people. So there can be this feeling of, well, it's not really, you haven't suffered as much as I have. Okay. They're not trying to outmartyr other people. What it is more along the lines of, you don't know what true suffering is. Okay. That's something that can come out with this Saturn Chiron conjunction. And so when other people say, oh, I had a bad day, or I broke up with my boyfriend, or I'm having a rough time of it emotionally, someone who has Saturn and Chiron together in Pisces in their chart is going to basically, the response is going to be like, oh, what first world problems? It's going to be like, wow, you call that suffering? World's tiniest violin here, and it's this feeling like you're showing disrespect, that people who haven't suffered that much or whom suffering is going to now be made relative to them, they're showing a disrespect towards those who have truly suffered. So it's kind of weird. On one hand, there's a kind of like, there's a judgment, that you don't know suffering as much as I do. And if you did, you would have a stiff upper lip about it. You wouldn't be like whining so much or whatever. And then there's also kind of elitism that can be involved in that as well. Not pride that I've suffered more than someone else, but this judgment, this assumption that you call that suffering, that isn't really what has gone on with people who've really suffered these problems, or people who have really struggled with these rights. And that's where you can sort of see the opposition that's showing up between the two of them. And then, of course, the two are squaring Jupiter, which is in the middle. So Jupiter in Gemini is caught between the two. That's because Jupiter in Gemini squares Uranus and Pluto in Virgo, and it squares Saturn and Chiron in Pisces. So Jupiter in Gemini is being put in the position of the judge, all right, which makes perfect sense because Jupiter was named after Zeus, the Greek god of judgment. Now, Jupiter in Gemini, I always associate with kindergarten rules. I got this idea from Robert Fulghum's book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And he does indeed list the kindergarten rules. Rule number 1 is learn to share. Rule number 2 is learn to play fair. Rule number 3 is do not hit people. Rule number 4, put things back where you got them. Rule number 5 is clean up after your own mess. Rule number 6 is don't take things that aren't yours. And rule number 7 is say sorry when you hurt somebody. Now, what I would like to invoke for this moment would be rules number 3 and rules number 7. Rule number 3 is do not hit people, which could be considered as do not do harm to another person. And rule number 7 is say that you're sorry when you hurt someone. Now, in this instance, the Singleton sun of Leo has been really fired up on J.K. Rowling's part. I mean, so much to an extent where people are really like, okay, we got, that you were making a stand on something, but is this really the hill you want to die on? And why are you so impassioned with this? Why are you so kind of like obsessed with this? And we have another Leo image that we could share to sort of illuminate this idea, to explore this idea, this part of J.K. Rowling's chart. The figure that I want to invoke is Sekhmet. Sekhmet was the ancient Egyptian goddess of war and healing. She had a lion's head over a woman's body. She was also the patron deity of physicians and healers and could at one time spread disease and cure it. Now, this is fascinating to me because Leo, we know, is ruled by the sun. The sun is the ruling planet. We have Sekhmet, who is a goddess of war, but also a goddess of healing. She is a goddess of physicians and healers, but she can also spread disease and cure it. This very much echoes Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, who was the healing god. Asclepius was his son, who was tutored in the arts of healing by Chiron. So Asclepius was his son, his divine golden child. So Apollo could heal. He teaches the healing arts to Chiron, the wounded healer in Greek mythology. But Apollo was also famous for sending plagues through his arrows. He would shoot his arrows into people and cause plague and infestation. So I think it's fascinating that we see a lioness goddess from Egypt who is mirroring these qualities from a Greek deity. Both are associated with the sun, which is the ruling planet of Leo. So equally feared and worshipped, the lioness Sekhmet was without a doubt one of the most prominent goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. Now, there's a myth in which Ra, the sun god, experiences a setback in his rule on Earth, and so he sends Sekhmet to destroy the mortals who conspired against him, to destroy the mortals who betrayed him in his battle with some other deities. Now, in the myth, Sekhmet's bloodlust in battle, where she is wreaking vengeance on these mortals who betrayed Ra, is not quenched. It's not quenched by her destroying the people who had conspired against Ra. In fact, it leads her into a bloody rampage that lays waste to Egypt itself and almost destroys humanity and the planet. She's full of this solar fiery rage, the sun at the peak of summer, this unbearable heat, this scorching heat. She's full of this rage that she's taking out in righteous justice on humanity. And she's basically threatening the planet itself. And so the other gods decide that in order to stop her, they're going to pour beer into this lake and they're going to dye it red. So they go and they get all of this beer that they dye red and they pour it into this lake. And Sekhmet sees it and she's like, more blood, because she's within a bloodlust. It's completely overcome her. And she mistakes the beer for blood and she drinks it up and she gets so drunk that she passes out and she returns peacefully to Ra. Okay, so basically they stop it by getting her drunk. She mistakes the booze as blood and she returns back to Ra. Now, the reason that I bring this up is really as a kind of description of what a singleton sun can become when it's not taking things in perspective, when it's not aware of how carried away it's gotten. What's fascinating about this, which is Imani Khelif, who is the target of J.K. Rowling's ire and her anger, maybe perhaps her bloodlust, it could be said, in terms of this cyberbullying. The boxer who was accused of being a man and has taken a lawsuit out against Rowling, Trump, and Musk. It's interesting because Imani Khelif is a Taurus, which means that her ruling planet is Venus, named after the goddess of love and beauty and peace. Well, what's fascinating is that Imani Khelif's ruling planet Venus is at 22 degrees Gemini. That means that Imani Khelif's Venus is exactly conjunct J.K. Rowling's Jupiter at 22 degrees Gemini. Ironically, it parallels how J.K. Rowling took out a restraining order against her husband who was abusive, and Imani Khelif is likewise taking out a restraining order of sorts against J.K. Rowling for cyberbullying her on X. Perhaps the cyberbullying that J.K. Rowling has inflicted on Khelif may be what's needed to remind Rowling of her own experience with abuse. Indeed, there is a character in Harry Potter whose name is Snape. He's a teacher at Hogwarts who is very hard on Harry in his studies. He's severe almost to the point of abuse. Now, eventually, Harry learns that Snape is that way because Harry's father had once bullied Snape in school. Harry becomes more open-minded and more open-hearted towards Snape as a result of this revelation, and Snape winds up becoming one of Harry's protectors, one of Harry's father figures, who ultimately sacrifices himself for Harry. There is a phrase that we know from the Hippocratic Oath, an oath that is taken by all doctors and physicians, an oath that was passed down from Asclepius, who was the golden child, the healer, the son of Apollo, the sun god. And that oath is primum non nocere. It means first do no harm. It's an important motto that we can apply to our daily lives. First do no harm. Another idea is grace. In Christianity, grace is freely given, unmerited favor, and love. So what's needed is grace on both sides. Grace for those who have issues with the trans community, that they make more of an effort to understand the trans community. They don't have to agree, but they do have to do a better job of making an effort to understand without condemnation. And grace can also be practiced by the trans community to adopt a live and let live, that there may be people who don't get it, but as long as they're doing no harm, to practice the idea of live and let live. In fact, this entire conversation talks about fluidity. It talks about moving past set roles and moving into a fluidity. And with this fluidity comes an understanding, a true sentiment of wanting to get along. Remember that grace is unmerited love. It's favor without having been one. It's an extraordinary concept, this Christian concept of love, and one that should be practiced. Whether we ever master it or not is another thing, but the point is to practice it. And finally, people shouldn't actively go against what they don't know. They shouldn't actively play into their condemnations and their fears. There is a social obligation for everyone to participate in society, especially during this time with Pluto moving into the astrological sign of Aquarius. The motto of Aquarius is that society is only good as the people in it. Each one of us has an oath of service to make the world a better place, free of cancellation, free of condemnation, and free of love only on condition. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.